Clump foliage is always a good thing to have on hand. Whether decorating miniature bases or terrain, using as bushes or leaves, or simply opening yourself up to a whole new world of overused puns because it's also known as flock. With little more than a sponge and a dream and also about an hour and a half, you too can make more clump foliage than you've ever flocking dreamed of. Let's get into it. First things first, grab a car sponge, a wire brush, a glove, and a small bucket. Grab the sponge and brush and rake the wires along the sponge into the bucket all while wearing the glove. The glove is optional and only necessary if you enjoy keeping your skin on your hand. The bucket is also optional and only necessary if you want to make clump foliage and not just a flocking mess. This process took roughly 20 minutes and about 6 hand cramps. Don't worry about the big chunks as they can be dealt with later. Once done, grab a cake pan and a strainer. Use the strainer to sort out all the sponge dust while picking out all of the largest pieces and setting them aside. This process is a lot easier if you have access to fast forward technology and can turn about 20 minutes into 10 seconds. Put all but the dust back into the bucket and use one of those cool transitions to come back to the desk. Dump the clumps and grab an empty container for the greatest snack in the whole flocking world. Start tearing up all the largest pieces into the rough size you'd like. Scissors don't work well for this process because they make clean cuts, and for clump foliage, rough tears work better. Once done, set that aside and grab 3 or 4 of the grossest containers you own, some water, and a soon-to-be-abandoned stir stick. I'm going to make a few different colors of flock, starting with Apple Barrel's English Ivy Green. Mix that with some water into the container and stir until mixed. Next, I'm using Nutmeg Brown to emulate dirt and old leaves. Now that soon is now, I'm abandoning the stir stick in favor of a paintbrush. Thirdly, a mix of Diva Pink and watered down Barn Red will hopefully mimic cherry blossom leaves to be made in the future. Once the colors are mixed to a consistency slightly thicker than water, grab the foil-lined baking sheet that your wife was going to use to make dinner and set that aside for yourself for later. Put on your laziest Firefly cosplay and bring back the paint. Sprinkle in the sponge like you were preparing a slightly more flavorful bowl of Vitamin King. Mix the foliage into the paint using a stir stick for about 8 seconds before giving up and using your hand instead. Let the sponge absorb the paint mixture and squeeze it out. Do this a few times and then spread it along the cookie sheet to dry. Grab the other paint and repeat the process. If necessary, add more paint, but don't worry if some of the natural green from the sponge shows through. Lastly, bring out the English Ivy paint. Mix until there's very little liquid and the sponge looks like some weird species of green cauliflower. Lastly, mix Apple Barrel's Limeade and Holly Green to recreate some of Judge Doom's famous dip. Throw in some brown until it's the color you'd like. In this batch, I'm going to use the small bits I strained out earlier to make a moss-type substance. Take off your glove and admire a perfect recreation of every 90s cartoon cafeteria lunch tray. Put the whole tray in a low oven for some amount of time or until dry. Once done, break up the foliage and put it into separate containers for when you're ready to flock stuff up. Flock is something I don't use that much. Every now and again when I'm decorating a base, putting the finishing touches on a piece of terrain, or trying to bring my expletives down to a more family-friendly level. Now that this foliage has more clumps than the Nutty Professor 2, I'll be ready to flock and roll all night and party every day. Have a good one. On last week's episode... Thirdly, a mix of Diva Pink and watered down Barn Red will hopefully mimic cherry blossom leaves to be made in the future. Trees hold a near magical meaning in storytelling throughout history. The Great Deku Tree, the White Tree of Gondor, and the Tree Christmas Ghost that ruined Scrooge's carol. They provide basic necessities to humanity like wood, shade, and a creative way to tell those ghosts what they can make like in leaf. For wargaming, they provide the third most important thing after the prerequisite loneliness and laying down of dignity: cover. And with a little more than a walk in the sunlight and some nature garbage, all manner of trees can be made cheaply and easily. Let's get into it. First things first, find some wood filler, some super nippers, and a pile of some of those sticky things from your yard. Grab one of the thicker sticks to use as a trunk for the tree, and then start snipping the smaller sticks for the branches. This is best done at a slight angle. Try to get a vague idea of how the sticks fit together before bringing out a hot glue gun that's far too big. Glue the sticks together into the rough shape of a tree while spiraling into existential nihilism over the fact that you'll never say anything funnier than the video of a squirrel falling out of a tree. For 3-number tree, I'm using a large oval base, roughly 120 by 92 millimeters. Glue the sticks laying down at an angle to make them look like they've been attacked by Daggett and Norbert. Once everything is glued together, get out your gap filler of choice. I'm using J.B. Weld's 2-part quick wood because I didn't have enough time to use slow wood. Toss on a blue glove so that you and your bug-eyed friend can enjoy an unresolved storyline before breaking off a piece of that J.B. Weld and mix well until it's one solid color. Press the wood filler into the gaps of the trees with a sculpting tool or gloved finger and smooth until it's natural looking. Once done, create a small root system at the base of the tree and stick the whole thing on a paper plate or piece of cardboard to cure. Do the same with the next tree and wonder whatever happened to that famous squirrel with the stick telling everyone to protect their nuts. Set those aside to listen to Boys Don't Cry and bring back that fallen tree with Eileen's tacky glue and some cream that's developed a bad attitude. Accidentally do some graffiti on the base of the fallen tree before spreading the glue all over with a paintbrush that might betray you. Because if it did, it would be committing treason. Be relieved that the sour cream is just construction sand and cover the whole base. I'm dragging a paintbrush through the sand to create a small stream. Once dry, use watered down burnt umber by apple barrel to darken the sand into the proper mud color. While that dries, paint the JB Weld. Color matching the sticks can be a bit difficult, but get as close as possible and try to blend the transitions in between the filler and the sticks. Back to the tree in need of life alert, dry brush the darkened sand with a little bit of Apple Barrel's light mocha. Bring out the small box of clump foliage everyone should have on hand after last week and give the downed log a gentle flocking. Tacky glue works best if gravity is on your side. Dab some more glue randomly around the base and sprinkle on some dried leaves that you've been keeping in an Old Spice container for over a year because you're totally not a crazy person. Shake off the excess and bring out your preferred water effect. I bought this bottle of Geek Gaming Scenics over a decade ago, but clear glue will work just as well if you apply it thinly. After waiting so long that the foreshadowing has become 5-shadowing, bring back the Elton John trees and some clump foliage. I'm using pink to hopefully mimic cherry blossom leaves to be glued on now. This is a bit of a finicky process, and I would recommend a hot glue gun and a little bit of patience. Find the larger clumps of flock and glue them into the branches at a perpendicular angle. If you're not quite sure what I mean, try going outside and appreciating the beauty of nature. Study the trees around the neighborhood and get a feel for the way that the branches flow in and out of one another and explode into beautiful buds of photosynthesis until the beauty entices you to try to climb into one of the natural masterpieces, and then realize that you're too old and fat to climb trees and go home. With a properly disenchanted heart, take the trees off their plate and glue them to the 2 closest bases on hand. Put too much glue on the base, cover with sand, paint, dry brush, and finish. Like Meatloaf said, 2 at a tree ain't bad, and despite my botanical bumblings, this process is surprisingly easy and costs almost nothing. It can be done in an afternoon, unlike learning photosynthesis, which I thought took only buying a camera. Now please, I'm no tree hugger, and if you also don't like dating hippies but still want an excuse to try to pick up some nature garbage, these can be made with little more than some scraps picked off the outside floor. Have a good one. Archer's towers are great for wargames. They can provide cover as well as elevation while giving the player something to fight in, on, and around. And if you place a miniature of a cow on top of one, it's a great way to raise the stakes in any game. With little more than a trip to the dollar store, a small assortment of paints, and the world's worst toothbrush, these towers can be made quickly and easily. Let's get into it. First things first, find a ruler, razor, square, golf club brush, and some foam board that's been peeled and deveined. Grab the foam board and draw a grid of 1/2 inch by 3 inch planks. Each tower will take 22 planks to make, meaning that at any given time, Johnny 2x4 is carrying around 4.5% of a tower along with him. Take a moment to meditate on the dangers of bad vocabulary, recalling the time you were poisoned and your friend thought the only way to help was with an amusing story. Once done offloading some of the bad puns told to you by the octopus that lives in your brain, take the wire brush you borrowed from your dad's golf bag and scrape it a long ways on the planks to emulate wood grain. Do this on both sides as well as the ends, going from top to bottom. This process can be a bit tedious, but provides an excellent opportunity to remember when Seabiscuit got arrested and called asking for bail money. He didn't get out that night, but I heard he ate well. Once properly scraped, cut the planks apart, reminiscing about Domino's breadsticks before they sold out and switched to twists. Stack up the planks and scrape both sides, ingraining them with, well, grain. Just be sure to hold them in the center or... yep. Soldier on and edit out the 4 other times they exploded out of your hand like Gambit out of Shinders, and get out the hot glue gun, or as they call it in the hobby community, a hot glue gun. Start by gluing 4 planks into a square with one in the middle acting as a crossbeam. Glue 5 planks flat across the top adjacent to the crossbeam. Break one of the planks in half to give it some wear and tear. Next, grab 8 more planks per tower and sandwich them in pairs like the most underrated cookie from your childhood. Glue each fresh post into the corner of the tower and glue the crossbar to connect all of the posts. Set that aside and cut 2 more planks the length you'd like your bridge. Grab 3 short planks per 2 inches of bridge and cut 1/2 of an inch off of each plank and glue them in a row perpendicular to the long pieces with a little bit of overhangs on the first and last plank to set on the tower. Once you reach a conclusion to the convolution, get out a mixture of Mod Podge and black paint and use a makeup brush with long soft bristles that you stole from your wife 13 episodes ago. Make sure to get the Mod Podge into all the cracks and crevices left by that golf club brush that you forgot to return. While half of that dries, use those long steakhouse toothpicks to make a ladder while learning that this kind of ladder and later ladder are spelled differently, rather than learning it after emailing your entire department at work with said mistake. Bring back the 2 towers like you're returning a DVD and finish coating with Mod Podge and paint, and then do the same with the bridge and set aside. Once dry, use Apple Barrel's chocolate bar mixed with a little bit of water to coat all 3 pieces. Try to shut down the intrusive thoughts and remember that no matter how delicious it looks or deceptively it may be named, don't taste the paint. Also on the subject of chocolate bars, can someone please call Reese and tell him that he doesn't need to keep putting weird stuff in the big cups and that we like him for the way he is. Also, bring back Butterfinger Crisp. Dry brush with Apple Barrel's light mocha, but do it quietly enough so that your wife doesn't hear you and demand that you get her a coffee. If you want to avoid that risk and make the piece look more old and worn, use a light gray to dry brush instead. Water down some Arbor Green and daub it randomly onto the piece, focusing more so on the bottom before smearing it into the piece with a dry brush to make it look moldy and mossy when it dries into the recesses of the grain. Lastly, after almost forgetting to bring back the ladder, soak it with some more chocolate bar that I can say with certainty does not in fact taste like a chocolate bar. I've never understood what carpentry has to do with wood and not laying fabric on the floor, but with this method of turning foam board into faux board, the only limit is your imagination. Goofy puns aside, I can truly say that building these has been an elevating experience, tempting one to look down on those that haven't built them. But that just might be me talking from my high horse, which is why Seabiscuit was in jail in the first place. Have a good one. Industrial pipelines are great for war games. Not only do they provide cover and concealment as well as great maze for your minis to fight in, on, and around, but they also provide context for the fight, communicating that the fight is probably taking place in a place of industry, maybe even business. With little more than some hot glue, spray paint, and the toys you threaten to take away from your children if they didn't get the darn living room picked up, these pipes can be made cheaply and easily. Let's get into it. First things first, find a bag of pipe toys from that thing that Al Gore invented in 1991. This can be done with a Google search of construction pipe toys and 6 months of waiting if you're ordering off Temu. Dump the pipes out and start putting them together like you're trying to recreate what is objectively the best screensaver from the 90s, keeping a vague idea of size and shape in mind and leaving 1 or 2 open horizontal pipes and a multitude of open vertical ones to be capped off later. Get out a hot glue gun and crackle up the pipes like President Business, taking all the fun and whimsy out of a colorful child's toy with the intent of turning them into the landscape of a grim dark nightmare. Just make sure to have fun and don't agonize over the decision knowing that it won't be able to be changed later. Once done, grab a handful of lids from your children's applesauce pouches. If you don't have children, try digging through the garbage at your local park, which I have been assured is weird but not illegal. Clean off the bottom of the lids with your favorite set of nippers and glue them onto any open vertical pipe. Grab a metal file while your conscience goes crazy about something. And no, that's not a joke. A cricket found its way into my basement and is making its presence known. File a groove into one of the horizontal pipes so it'll fit flush with a bean can from dinner. This'll act as our pipeline silo. Glue a small amount of the massive amount of trash you've collected as greeble to the can to make it look more sci-fi and set it aside. Get out the remaining horizontal pipes and lay a piece of wax paper underneath them. Bring the glue gun back out and pump them full until they look like Stimpy's socks. Let the glue overflow and cool. Bring everything to that place in between your house and car known as the outside and prime everything with a flat black spray primer, taking care to get in all of the nooks and crannies of the piece. Once dry, bring everything back inside and coat gently with Folk Art's Gunmetal Gray using a soft bristled makeup brush. If you don't have a wife you can steal one from, they can be picked up at your local Dollar General for $1 or $2. I mean the makeup brushes. Then for a little more definition, grab your closest dictionary. After doing enough research to know that that's not funny, dry brush everything with a mixture of Folk Art's Sterling Silver and Apple Barrel's Granite Gray. Give the chemical spills an uneven base coat in Apple Barrel's White and set aside for later. Next, sponge on a mix of Folk Art's Antique Copper and Apple Barrel's Pumpkin Orange for rust spots. Then mix in some burnt umber and dab it around the joints in places water would collect. Lastly, find a triad of colors for the chemicals and paint them with the darkest color and slowly moving in, cover less and less with the lighter colors. The levers of industry and the levers of power are often one and the same, and in war games, the power to dominate your opponent is often won or lost with the roll of a dice. Therefore, I think Chessex is probably going to take over the world. In truth, these pipes are extremely easy to make and paint, and after settling on a proper configuration, the hardest part of this project is figuring out how to react when Mario pops out of one of the pipes and stomps your turtle to death. But, in anticipation of my dad asking me exactly what these pipes are supposed to be for, I'm going to give him the same answer I gave to the guy wearing a Bob Marley shirt in the smoke shop I used to work at after he used the B word. It's a water pipe. Have a good one. In 2003, shortly after the release of Pirates of the Caribbean: Curse of the Black Pearl, carpenters the world over took on the seemingly impossible task of bringing fantasy into reality, and the first ever real pirate ship was built by prop master Titanic Naval Gazer. The seven seas were then littered with rodents with an affinity for pastry, and the world of piracy had to be relegated to the domain of wargames. Fortunately, pirate ships are great for wargames. Small, cramped decks cut out on the ability for gunners to hide so that those that do the real work can get up close and personal. And the ship itself provides context and a reason for the fight over something as important as cargo or control of shipping lanes, or something as petty and insignificant as who gets to stand on the poop deck. With little more than some foam and a pen, a ship worthy of the Dread Pirate Roberts can be made cheaply and easily. Let's get into it. First things first, grab a chunk of Pink Panther foam along with a box cutter and a ruler and mark the midpoint of the foam or bow of the ship, along with a point about 2/3 up the side. Draw a convex curve connecting the bow and one of the markings on the side. Cut along the curve and grab a piece of paper. Set the foam on the paper, aligning the straight edges, and trace the curve with a pencil. Then trace it again with a box cutter for redundancy. Trace the curve with the foam and be left, or port, with a symmetrical footprint of the ship. Then grab a piece of dollar store foam board and cut a long strip 10 inches wide. Peel off the paper and lay the footprint of the ship long ways across the foam, tilting it upwards to measure the length of the sides. Cut the whole thing into a large rectangle. Cut the rectangle in half hot dog style so that it's 5 inches by however long the sides are. If you've recently had a large meal and need to add a poop deck, draw another curve of the side railing to the main deck about 3 inches tall. Cut off the excess and trace the curve on the starboard side, and then make like Dave Coulier and cut it out. Cut out another square the width of the footprint and the height of the poop deck to act as the ship's aft. Resist the urge to paint it pink and write juicy across the planks and set it aside. Bring it back out along with everything else and mark half-inch segments going long ways or horizontally across the ship using a straight edge and a pen to carve planks into the foam. On the port and starboard side, carve vertical lines every 6 inches, offsetting the lines 3 inches every other layer to create the illusion of individual planks. Do the same for the inside of each piece for what will remain visible. Once done, trace the piece of Jacques Clouseau foam on another piece of dollar store foam board to act as the main deck. Set that aside and grab your favorite mustache comb and brush every plank long way to mimic wood grain. If you don't have a mustache, start growing one and pilfer a golf club brush from that guy that only golfs as an excuse to drink before noon. Next, clean out your hot glue gun after using that and a mozzarella stick to try to make fond glue, and start gluing everything together. And to answer your question, no, it wasn't nearly as brilliant or tasty as I'd hoped. Get the main deck back out and shiver its timbers while secretly wishing that Miss Piggy would have ended up with Tim Curry. Bring back the main body of the ship and a few offcuts of pink foam. Cut out small pillars for the main deck to sit on top of. Make sure to glue one where you want the mast to stick out. Dab a bit of glue on top of all the pillars and lay the main deck down on top of everything. Then, using the same techniques as earlier, build a small box that'll create both the captain's quarters as well as the poop deck. If you're wondering why it's called the poop deck, it's because poop is a French term for aft, meaning that it's a separate deck closest to the rear end of the ship. Also, it's where the captain goes poop. Next, grab a large kebab stick and a drill bit or a drywall screw if you're disorganized, and punch a hole into one of those internal pillars for the mast. Check the fit before cutting out a rudder to be glued onto the back of the ship. Finally, it's time to base coat with the trusty mixture of Mod Podge and black paint. Make sure to get it in all the crevices left by the golf club brush. Let dry and coat with apple barrel's burnt umber thinned down with a little bit of water. Let dry again and dry brush the whole thing with warm buff, all the while wondering how in the world Treasure Planet was a commercial flop. Set the ship to the side and grab a few kebab sticks and a tote bag or other piece of disposable fabric. Cut a square of fabric more narrow than the ship and slightly longer than you want the sail to be. Glue the 2 crossbeams to the top and bottom of each sail, rolling each crossbeam in and re-gluing it. Glue the crossbeams to the mast, making sure to leave some slack, and then gluing another piece of fabric over the mast to reinforce the sail. Then create a spare sail by rolling some more fabric around a kebab stick and use that to cover up some of the more visible mistakes. Use some twine wrapped around the handle of a paintbrush as spare rope and build a sailor's wheel out of some more kebab sticks. I must admit that before the filming of this video, I couldn't have given a ship, but after walking a nautical mile on the big blue wet thing, I can confidently say that I think I've contracted a case of cabin fever. But building a boat is a lot like having a kid, and it's considered bad form to not give it a name. And in celebration of this channel reaching 100 subscribers, the name of this vessel will be chosen by whatever comment has the most likes a week from today. And despite the fact that the prospect of letting the internet name my boat disturbs me more than the story of the night your grandma met Errol Flynn, it'll be fun to see how much engagement I can farm out of it. Have a good one. But building a boat is a lot like having a kid, and it's considered bad form to not give it a name. And in celebration of this channel reaching 100 subscribers, the name of this vessel will be chosen by whatever comment has the most likes a week from today. And despite the fact that the prospect of letting the internet name my boat disturbs me more than the story of the night your grandma met Errol Flynn, it'll be fun to see how much engagement I can farm out of it. Have a good one. Happy. The world of idioms is a wild place. A place where ears are detachable, house pets can fall out of the sky, and molehills are friggin' huge. And despite the fact that some people like to make mountains out of molehills, I like to make my mountains out of foam. With little more than a can of foam gap filler, regular gap filler, and a little bit of spookiness, these mountains can add adventure to a table, inspire terror in a mini, and help us not sweat the small stuff like hospital visits and scheduling conflicts. Let's get into it. First things first, find a can of expanding spray foam. This can be found in the hardware section of most stores, or that store that sells things that look tasty but are probably not food safe. Spray the foam outside on a piece of cardboard or wax paper. I'm doing this in 2 sections, but that's because odd numbers are evil. Empty the can and leave to dry per the can's instructions. Once puffed up and cured, take them off the cardboard and try not to think about the fact that they look like a fat, legless facehugger. Bring those chubby little boys inside and find a box cutter and cut off all the round bits like you're carving an ungrateful turkey and save the thankful one for November. Just make sure to cut away from yourself because the box cutters are very sharp and skin is weak to slicing damage. Once done, cut multiple V-shapes all over the mountain. Now that the jump scares are ready, make sure to cut a chunk out of the rock roughly the size of the skull that's heckling you at the store. Grab that saw you bought to help you cope with the fact that your new friend has no body to go to the dance with, and remember that saw jokes are quite hacky. Separate the jaw from the rest of the skull, making sure not to cut yourself, and cut off the back of the skull as well. Press both pieces into the foam before gluing them in with a hot glue gun. Next, grab a bucket of spackle and toss on a rubber glove, unless you want your hand to look like the Crypt Keeper. Lament the fact that this frosting tastes terrible before giving the whole piece a very thin coat all over. Just fill the holes in the foam while leaving a little bit of texture. Take a moment to think of a name for a place that sells enticing food that can kill you, and settle on Mr. Yuck's House of Fluff to farm both nostalgia and comments because the engagement is good for the channel, and everyone needs to remember an unsuccessful poison control campaign from the 70s. Grab the other hunk of foam and cut out a few smaller rock formations following the same process. Cut out the channels and fill everything with the strawberry drywall. Once the wall is now properly dry, take everything outside and coat with matte black spray paint. For some odd reason, this particular type of foam doesn't melt when sprayed with spray paint, but make sure to test on one of your offcuts so you don't end up looking like that raccoon that tried to wash his cotton candy. Let the whole thing dry once again and give the piece an overbrush in Apple Barrel's Pewter Gray, making sure to get into all the cracks and crevices. Dry brush in white to make everything look dusty and sun-bleached before moving on to the outro. If we've learned anything from Dr. Willy, Princess V, Brainiac, Captain Hook, the Skullosaurus, Cassandra Nova, King Kong, Immortan Joe, King Andre, Skeletor, or even the fourth little pig, it's that every hero needs his own skull fortress to call home. Because when you're feeling under the gun, there's nothing better than going home and hitting the sack. And if you're having trouble wrapping your head around what I'm saying, just hang in there because I'm dusting off that old idiom joke again. But I think I might be barking up the wrong tree and beating a dead horse with this joke because it seems to be getting a little long in the tooth. So let's stop beating around the bush and bite the bullet and call it a day. Have a good one. Meow. The shortest distance between 2 points will always be a straight line, and the longest distance between 2 points will be between Thor, Love and Thunder and any sort of laughter at all. Whether it be an interdimensional gate unleashing unspeakable horrors on a small medieval village, or a drunken scientist going on wacky misadventures, a mysterious portal will fit in perfectly with any tabletop RPG or wargame. With little more than some recycled plastic, pink insulation foam, and a handful of moon rocks, the space between having portals and not having portals can be traversed in the blink of an eye. Let's get into it. First things first, grab a piece of chipboard or cardstock and mark a square the size you'd like your portal. Quarter the square and cut a quarter oval from the midpoint of one side to the other. Use this as a template to cut an oval that's symmetrical. Then find a piece of clear plastic out of the garbage, trace an oval, and cut it out with a pair of scissors. Bonus points if you use your wife's good fabric scissors. Repeat this process until you realize that size really does matter and decide to make something with some girth by tracing a furniture coaster on a piece of chipboard from earlier. Make another oval with the same techniques from earlier while trying to figure out what the heck those fancy beer mugs with the lids or thorny flowers have to do with interdimensional travel. Trace the oval and cut it out and get ready to paint. Each portal will be made with 3 colors, the first being Apple Barrel's Admiral Blue, a messy turquoise, and some Caribbean. Mix the paint with enough water to make them slightly see-through. Grab the plastic oval from earlier and set it up on a pair of tongue depressors you keep in your house to discourage happy talk. Use a pipette or eyedropper you kept from when your cat had ear mites to drop the paint on the plastic in a random pattern, starting with the lightest color and moving to the darkest. The next color scheme will use Apple Barrel's Limeade, which isn't as tasty as it sounds, Holly Branch, and English Ivy Green. Painting plastic like this is definitely more of a science than an art, in that sometimes science is more art than science, and you'll have to bumble your way through, hoping that in the end everything looks good. Portal number 3 will use Diva Pink, Wisteria, and Royal Violet and will hopefully take you somewhere fabulous. Set those aside to dry and get out the last 2 pieces of plastic and paint them with King's Gold, Pumpkin Orange, and Bright Red. With this color scheme, use curved vertical streaks to emulate tongues of fire, and be prepared for an absolute mess while painting the big one because something surface tension. Once those are dry, bring them to that building that you parked your car in front of so that you can store your junk, and spray them with a satin clear coat. While that dries, use the chipboard stencil with a piece of pink insulation foam to trace out a stone frame or arch. Make like Uncle Joey and cut it out with a box cutter before balling up a piece of tinfoil to make a stony impression like you're a friend of Reed Richards. Round off the corners with a metal file and repeat this process while flexing those creative muscles by creating side arches, full arches, half arches, and under arches, all while maintaining an overarching narrative about repeating a simple process that's mildly repetitive, slightly meta, and completely long-winded to fill time. Then for the last gate, cut 2 identical pieces using dollar store foam board because I ran out of pink insulation foam. Next, attach the plastic into the foam with a hot glue gun. Cut small slits into the foam to nestle the oval into, like you're nesting a cheese sandwich into a panini press while trying to come up with a clever simile after skipping lunch. On an unrelated note, what's the mathematical formula to calculate the difference in the amount of grilled cheese sandwiches I eat before and after buying a panini press? Because after crunching the numbers, the only thing I can come up with is a shameful amount. Next, find the bottle of Mod Podge mixed with black paint that you keep on your bedside table and give everything a thin coat in the marvelous mixture, being careful not to get paint all over your portals. This will not only provide a base coat for the foam, but also harden it and make it more durable. Just make sure to only use a thin coat because it's currently fall and a full jacket would be kind of overkill. Once dry, give each piece a secondary base coat in the darkest color used to paint the portal, incorporating a little bit of black along the sides and a little bit of white closer to the portal to make the whole thing look slightly luminescent. The 2 red portals, on the other hand, will be based with a slightly watered down black. Let everything dry one final time before brushing on the corresponding midtones, highlights, and a little bit of white, once again brushing lighter colors a little heavier towards the center. Use brown, gray, and white to finish the red portals to give them a more mountainous quality before liking the video for the sheer fact that I got through an entire project about portals without referencing misleading pastry. Traveling from one place to another is easy, but doing so in the blink of an eye is a power only reserved for overrated stories that already exhausted the convenience of magical trains, flying cars, mystical fireplaces, levitating brooms, arcane boots, unfortunate trophies, tunneling toilets, anti-gravity motorcycles, and invisible horse birds, and still can't resist the temptation of, yeah, they can just teleport now. Whether summoning up hordes from the underworld, traveling to ethereal planes, or finding the easiest way to shave your own back, thinking with portals will revolutionize getting from here to there by making there here, but also making there there, meaning I have to travel from there to there to get here, but where do I go to get here? But forget it, I'm gonna go shave my back. Have a good one. There are two things I don't like to mess with: electricity and HOAs. The shocking truth about the ungrounded, petty corruption of a group of people telling me I can't put a 20-foot tall inflatable rubber duck stepping on Jeep on my lawn is a great reminder that the only good HOA is an old-fashioned Al Pacino hooah! But unlike HOAs, electricity is actually useful, giving us things like fake gum to prank our friends, toggle switches to keep in our pockets because for some odd reason fidget toys are cool now, but most importantly, electricity has given us gang boxes, a small plastic box that's probably used for something, but when combined with literal garbage can be used to make a house perfect for any TTRPG or war game. Let's get into it. First things first, pick up a couple of electrical gang boxes from the store and use a coping saw to cut off the wings like Tim Taylor at Thanksgiving. Don't throw the wings away because for once these will actually be used later. Then find the piece of sandpaper you kept in your back pocket for that hilarious SpongeBob cosplay and give everything a good rub down to make the paint and glue stick better later. Take the nails out of the wings from earlier and scrape them up like you're playing that eraser game from middle school. Then load up your hot glue gun and start sticking stuff on the gang boxes like it's a tacky fridge full of magnets. Try to remember whether or not your fridge is full of magnets before attaching a 3D printed door to the front of the building and grabbing a small pretzel container full of random plastic pieces you've collected over the years. This is mostly an assortment of the tops of applesauce pouches, beads, buttons, gears, and any random piece of interesting looking plastic I can find. Just play around until something looks like it could fit and then sand it down and glue it on. The nice thing about this project in particular is that everyone has access to different garbage, meaning that every piece will be unique and special in their own way, just like you, a unique piece of garbage. Then sing Trash Trash Go Away and Come Again Another Day and cut a door-shaped hole about 1 inch by 2 inches and glue in another piece of interesting looking plastic on the inside so that it's a little offset. Then using the coffee stir stick you stole from Starbucks with all the grace and subtlety of a cat falling into the bathtub, cut a frame out of the stir stick and glue it to the sides of the door. After framing the doorway like it's Roger Rabbit, glue on a few more bits and bobs before taking everything out to the garage, or as the French say, garage. Prime everything with a matte black spray primer before realizing that the only way to tell what language someone is speaking when talking about where to park your car is how pretentious they are. Once dry, bring everything back inside and get ready to paint. Start with Apple Barrel's Admiral Blue, painting only the original gang box, leaving most of the extra bits as they'll be painted silver and brass later. The second house will be based with an English ivy green. Just make sure to brush lightly enough so that all the markings from the sanding show through. Moving back to blue, give everything a heavier highlight in cobalt hue, which is absolutely going to be on my list of names for D&D characters I'll never play, along with Potatoes O'Brien and Miss Holly Branch, who will be providing our greenhouse midtones. And also, coincidentally, Greenhouse Midtones will be playing at First Avenue this weekend. Dry brush the blue house with Caribbean, or Caribbean if you're an aristocrat, focusing mainly on the corners and raised edges. Finish the green off with limeade, wondering why I can never learn that it doesn't taste nearly as good as it sounds or even be bothered to write new jokes. Finally, paint all the greeble, alternating between folk art's Freedom Metal Gray and Antique Copper, making sure to paint it on thin so that all the black shows through and makes the metal pieces look faded and worn. Lastly, take both pieces outside and spray them down with a satin spray primer because the store was out of cashmere spray primer. Think a little too hard about what that joke could possibly mean and then finally move on to the outro. Home is where the heart is. But when I accuse some guy sleeping on the street of not having any organs, people call me heartless, leaving me to wonder why some random guy that thinks he's a lot funnier than he is accusing me of not having one of those big pianos from church. These homes, on the other hand, are where the dice are, and the dice are on the table. But according to HOA regulations, all dice with an amount of faces exceeding 6 must be contained within a standard issue dice bag, and all tables not used for dining or coffee must be in clean folding condition and up for no more than 2 hours at a time. Also, are your miniatures in proper table-ready order? Have a good one. I've never been good with the ladies. But despite the fact that I'll never be Rico Suave, JB Smoove, or Mr. Steal Your Girl, I am and will always be Mr. Steal Your Grandma. And when I leave your Nona's house with a belly full of home cooking and a pocket full of Werthers, you'll know that like Tony, I've done it again. It's not just because my references are so dated that they could be collected and sold as a calendar, but because I let my love of plastic soldiers and all things miniature translate to an appreciation of knickknackery. I love a good collection of souvenir spoons or painted plate decorated with a cardinal. I can coo over precious moments, and you bet your backside I can build her a display for her insanely expensive Department 56 Christmas houses. I'm not a peak grandson just because I can bebop at the sock hop, not just because I can find the channel on the TV with that fella with the bow tie, but because your me mom not only finds me handsome, she finds me handy. And with little more than a sheet of foam and a box cutter, you too can be a grandma's boy worthy of your $12 birthday check. Let's get into it. First things first, figure out how big the table is you're making the display for. The table I'm working with is 5 foot by 37 inches. I'll be making my display in 3 20 by 37 inch sections for ease of transit and because everything is better in threes, like similes, metaphors, analogies, and examples. Once you've decided on a good size, bring a large sheet of white insulation foam down to the floor and cut out the bottom levels. Take the time to cut the foam precisely. Foam is usually forgiving, unlike Janet in HR, but being that these pieces will be setting next to one another, take the time and make sure the blade is sharp and the cuts are straight. Once the bottom 3 layers are cut, move on to level 2. This will cover between 30 and 60% of level 1, and I would suggest sketching out a rough outline to keep the hills and bluffs cohesive. Just make sure to save your larger offcuts as they can be used for the second and third levels. Build up that third level with the bigger offcuts, trying to keep them at least 6 by 6 or 8 inches by 8 inches to accommodate the houses they'll be holding. Lay everything out on the floor so that you have a rough design of your final shape. Start with the chunks of foam that are on the third level or standing alone and mark the sides that need to be cut. Cut out bluffs and crags by slicing into the foam with a box cutter at an angle and mirroring the same cut on the other side. Use different angles, depths, and tilts to vary the crags to make an interesting shape. Use this time as a moment to remember your grandma and all she does for you, and then comment her best recipe so that I'll know what I'll be having for dinner tonight. Make sure to clean up as you go because this process is extremely messy, and trying to suck up all that foam with a vacuum cleaner will clog the hose and burn out the motor of said vacuum cleaner that your grandma got for you as a housewarming gift, changing this from a $25 project into a $45 project. Also, I don't know how much vacuum cleaners cost. Once done, set all the pieces back up and start gluing them down. For smaller pieces, I'm using a hot glue gun. Glue down only the finished pieces or pieces that will share an edge so that they can be cut together, maintaining cohesion between the crags like a really good Bond film. Then a not so good Bond film. Then an okay Bond film. And then maybe a couple more that came and went and no one really cared about. For any larger pieces, use a giant tub of school glue you bought for some reason 10 years ago and spread it on with the last paintbrush that backsassed you. Set that aside for a day, weighed down with a few of those college textbooks you haven't thrown away yet, and begin cutting bluffs into the larger pieces. This process is nearly identical to cutting bluffs into the smaller ones, except you can see the couch from the 70s my grandma gave me in the background. Glue down the second piece, spreading the glue around with that paintbrush you accused of backsassing you because you misplaced your larger paintbrush, and set that aside, weighed down under a couple of those weight plates you promised yourself you'd start using, and move on to the third and final section. Clean up the edges and cut out the last of the crags, and just admit that you didn't see Spectre or No Time to Die. This whole process is pretty simple but slightly repetitive, and like I told my wife 1,000 times, not enough people appreciate repetition. And just in case you didn't catch that, I've told my wife over 1,000 times that not enough people appreciate repetition. Christmas is still a few months away, and at the time of posting we're still in the midst of spooky season, and we all know that there's nothing scarier than starting to celebrate Christmas too early. The same 12 songs, played on repeat for 6 weeks without end, can turn even the jolliest of elves into a Grinch. And just to give a definitive answer on this, the proper time to start celebrating Christmas is after Advent. And if you don't know what Advent is, wait for it. Grandma's house isn't just a place that's over the hills and through the woods. It's not just a place to fill your belly and make awkward small talk with your cousins. Grandma's house is a place to experience joy, happiness, and the love of a mother that hasn't grown tired of your nonsense. So with the season of holidays and family dinners fast approaching, give your grandma a display for her Christmas village made with only a fraction of the love she's put into every meal and birthday, every Christmas and confirmation, and every little thing she's done with you without you ever appreciating it. Give her that and my number. Have a good one.